Hello, I'm Thomas Hare, Chief Content Officer of the Performance-Driven Marketing Institute, a not-for-profit trade association that serves companies in the performance and direct-to-consumer marketing world. Welcome to the second event in our 2024 summer seminar series, today created by the PDMI's Workshop Council, titled Data Safety in an Active Regulatory Environment. We welcome all of you to today's event, PDMI members and non-members alike. If you're not a PDMI member but are attending today, we'd love to have you consider joining the association. There's no better way to support the mission of the PDMI than joining and sharing your voice in the direction of the industry. In the handouts tab of your control panel, you'll find our PDMI membership brochure. I urge you to download it, flip through it, and contact any of our team members should you desire more information. One other housekeeping note, the group will be addressing any questions from the audience at the end of the session, but you don't have to wait to ask them. Utilize the questions tab on your control panel to type and send your question in. We'll be collecting them and we'll try to get to as many as possible in the final moments of the webinar. Now, when we started preparing today's conversation, we believed the end of cookies was coming soon. However, yesterday's big news from Google gives us a big shift in perspective here. However, at the same time, first-party data is still becoming more important to performance marketers, and with that comes expanded responsibility for privacy and security during data collection. Today, this group of experts will share the latest information performance marketers must know not only to make the most of their efforts, but also do so in a way that steers clear of regulators who are attempting to fit enforcement efforts in the space into old rules that may not have initially had data privacy in mind, as well as a very active class action bar. I'd like to welcome today's panel, headed by Workshop Council member and BakerHostetler partner, Randy Shaheen. We're fortunate to have one of his fellow partners at BakerHostetler, Justin Yedor, on hand, as well as Emily Kistner, Director of New Business and Identity Solutions at Adstra, and Shira, Witelson, founder of RSLT. Team, thanks for being here. Take it away.
Thanks, Tom. As Tom said, there's a lot to cover in this space and a lot of fast breaking news. So just want to thank you all for attending and thank my esteemed panel members. So we're gonna kind of dive right in. Let me start first. There's been a lot of class action litigation activity around a number of older laws that really were enacted, long before people were thinking about data privacy issues, that are now being used to attack the use of cookies and pixels. And I wonder, Justin, if you can kind of give us a summary of what's going on in the courts with some of these laws.
Thanks, Randy. And it's a lot, and it's a bit convoluted. And as you point out, this is an effort by plaintiffs' counsel to use statutes that have been on the books for decades, in some cases, to try to push toward an opt-in consent standard for online tracking technologies like cookies and pixels. So I'm sure many in the audience are familiar with the rules around targeted advertising opt-outs and opt-outs from sales and sharing under state privacy laws like the CCPA and the Virginia privacy law in Colorado and so on. But the plaintiffs' bar is actually pushing for a step further. And the way that they're doing it is by sort of weaponizing a couple different things. So one is penal codes, particularly in California, that prohibit eavesdropping or recording on phone calls without the consent of all parties. So as many are, again, likely familiar, there are rules around when you can and cannot record a phone call. There is a federal standard under the ECPA that essentially requires one-party consent, which could be the person who is doing the recording. But many states, including California, go beyond that, and they say, well, all the parties need to consent. Plaintiffs' counsel have sort of, perhaps creatively, I don't know if that's the right term, that's a very generous term, plaintiffs' counsel have come up with a creative theory to apply this to website tracking technologies. What they are alleging basically is that by using a technology like a pixel or even a third-party cookie, the website operator is aiding and abetting whoever the vendor is associated with that technology in eavesdropping on a conversation between the plaintiff and the website operator. These cases originated with technologies like online chat, so where there is perhaps a more clear type of conversation between a web user and a business, but they've subsequently expanded in multiple directions as different plaintiffs' counsel have become involved, as certain theories have been, shall we say, debunked, or sort of doubt has been cast on them. And I use those terms specifically because very few of these cases have actually been litigated. And so I wish I could say, well, there are all these claims that have been defeated on summary judgment or at a motion to dismiss, but the reality is that very few have actually made it to that stage.
And I assume that's because people are settling before they end up in court.
Yeah, absolutely. And this gets to the other factor which is driving these, which is wholly separate from privacy in any specific way. It's separate from any particular legal theory, and that is the phenomenon of mass arbitration. A lot of these claims are being brought through cookie cutter demand letters that are sent to website owners saying, if you don't settle with me, I am going to bring in our individual arbitrations on behalf of everyone who has visited your website from whatever the relevant jurisdiction is in whatever the relevant time period is. Under especially the older rules of many of the arbitration bodies, the business would need to pay a filing fee for each of these claims. And so what plaintiffs' counsel are saying in their demand letter is, well, look, you can either pay the arbitrators or you can pay me and settle the claim. And they have had some success in that regard with this sort of extortion type argument. There are new rules that many of the arbitration authorities have put out recently to try to consolidate mass arbitrations. These are still out there, but that's a big factor in these claims. And it's really taking advantage of the fact that, for the longest time, pretty much everybody who had a website and had a set of terms of service probably had an individual arbitration provision in there. At least a great majority of businesses did that.
Interesting. So we have these old laws. There's obviously a lot happening in terms of new state privacy laws that are written more specifically to address some of the current privacy concerns. Emily, I wonder if you want to start out and just give us some examples of what those state laws seek to regulate. And I know some of them raise some constitutional issues. Kind of summarize for us maybe what some of those are as well.
Sure. So kind of the original state privacy law, the CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act, was kind of the first of these state-specific privacy laws in the US. And in short, its goal was basically to give residents of California more control and transparency over their personal data. So the law required businesses to let consumers know how they were collecting and using their personal data, and it gave you these rights to opt out and to request deletion of your data. So we've just seen iterations, since then. And today we have 14 states with active privacy laws in place. And a good example of something that's buzzy right now is around healthcare data. So we have the My Health, My Data Act out of Washington, and it's the first law that protects health data outside of HIPAA, which we're probably all more familiar with. So it basically regulates how you can collect and share consumer healthcare data for residents of Washington. Then you have in California a similar but different California Confidentiality of Medical Information Act. And that basically requires protections when you're collecting and storing medical information for residents of California. So these also includes things like a mobile app from a fertility tracker or something like that. So now imagine these similar standards, but different, times 14. And that's kind of our current legal landscape around consumer privacy. It's a total mess. And it's a violation of the Constitution. It's a widely held, accepted view. There's something in the Constitution called the Dormant Commerce Clause. It basically states that individual states can't act in a protectionist way, and they can't impose these unjustified burdens on interstate commerce. So protectionism is usually used to defend like domestic industries against foreign competition through like import tariffs and things like that. But the free flow of interstate commerce is actually protected in the Constitution. And this Dormant Commerce Clause requires the federal government to act on regulation of interstate commerce. So we clearly haven't gotten there yet, but that's, part of the Constitution. And then on a broader level, just commercial speech like marketing is a form of protected communication under the First Amendment. And in order to curtail speech, you have to use something that's called strict scrutiny or a narrowly tailored remedy to provide a solution to the problem. So something like Justin was talking about, like a universal opt-in, for example, widely banning the use of data required in free speech and marketing is a really broad brush approach that's kind of over-regulating this protected right that companies have under the law. And we've seen the Supreme Court strike down things like this a lot, and I think it's kind of the generally held belief that that will continue to happen. So we're unlikely to see things like universal opt-in requirements being upheld in the US.
Yeah, it's interesting. As an advertising and privacy lawyer starting out, I never imagined I would have to much care about the Constitution, but it seems to come up more and more in these spaces.
Yeah.
So we wanted to kind of set the table with all the sobering kind of litigation risk, lawyer sort of talk, just to kind of illustrate why this topic is so important, because there are a lot of litigation and regulatory risks. But I want to shift a little bit to the more sort of solution centered side. Like, are there, what are some practical things folks can do to try to mitigate some of these risks? And so let me start. Shira, I know it's fairly common to use IP addresses for attribution on TV, for example. What are some of the main privacy concerns associated with that sort of practice? And what are some ways to kind of mitigate that or work around that, if you will?
Thank you, Randy. So first and foremost, I wanted to start by saying I don't believe in the use of IP addresses for TV attribution. And the main reason is because of privacy concerns. What is the privacy concern? When you put a pixel on the website, as you know, you can get the IP address. But then with this IP address, you can go to some very known third-party providers and get the name, the addresses, credit card information, etc. You can really get all the PII information that you want. Now, there are two types of IP addresses. One that's more commonly known, it's the static IP address. So this is when your IP address does not change over time, and you can really track the users. And in terms of privacy, as you understand, of course, it's really problematic. And then the second type of IP address that it's much less commonly used is the dynamic IP address. Now, with a dynamic IP address, very few people know that in fact you can leverage it to create some kind of cohort. Over time, you collect the dynamic IP addresses of a household, and you can create some kind of linkage. How do you do that? With an IP address, you don't get only the address. You get additional information, many variables, many parameters that were related to that users. And you can use all those parameters and take all the changing IP addresses and put everything together, and in fact create a user ID. So this is really problematic. Not a lot are doing this, but I suspect some. So those are the main issues with IP addresses. In fact, at the end of the day, you can get the personal information. People really don't want this. They came to a website, for specific reason. They don't want their information to be sold and used as in a way that they didn't accept. So in terms of I also, if it's okay, I want to touch also on the accuracy of that, because there is the part of the privacy, but with an IP address is also part of the accuracy. So if you would ask me this question like 5-6 years ago in terms of accuracy, I would say, you know, there's some accuracy to it. But as you know, with all the rules and regulation, IP address accuracy is diminishing. There are many blind spots. So what I was explaining about the dynamic IP addresses, as most do not know how to use it to create this user ID, they in fact try to leverage this IP changing address for attribution, and it's completely inaccurate. So this is one problem in accuracy. The second part is VPNs. VPNs are masking IP addresses, and from what I read, 33% of Americans have a VPN address in 2024. It's huge. So in terms of accuracy, it's completely, and it's just increasing the VPN use. So in terms of accuracy, it's completely going down. So in regard to your question, Randy, about you know what can be done about this, I truly believe that the best way for attribution is the leveraging machine learning. Because with machine learning, you look at aggregate data. You don't look at users. So this is one. And with aggregate data, you cannot connect personal information. What's on top of that, because you're looking at aggregate data and using, you know, sophisticated machine learning approach, you can look for patterns. Things that you cannot do with IP addresses. With IP addresses, it's very straightforward. This is the IP, this is the user, did it convert, yes or no? But with machine learning, because it's all about patterns, you can really find additional story and insights in the data. So that's why I'm a big believer in a machine learning approach for attribution. It's mainly also because of it's completely mitigating privacy concerns. Yeah.
Interesting. I'm sure we'll be hearing more and more about machine learning in this space, as well as pretty much everything else that we do. Until the machines, until we have machines that don't work. Like I don't know if anybody else got stranded over the weekend with CrowdStrike, but I did for a day or two. Emily, I know your company offers kind of a different workaround, if you will, towards, or a different solution towards compliance with some of these state privacy laws. Do you want to talk for a few minutes about kind of that approach towards trying to become compliant with, you know, this very rapidly changing landscape?
Sure. So I'm kind of on the opposite, you know, side of the debate platform from Shira, but I do agree with the pitfalls of using IP for persistence, accuracy. IPv6 is a huge issue right now when it comes to attribution measurement. That's could be a whole other webinar. So there are definitely pitfalls. IP could also, I mean, look at the ATT framework, like a signal, someone could change their terms and conditions and we could just have complete signal loss. So I think reliance on any single identifier as the crux of a measurement solution is a flawed approach regardless. We've seen that with MAID data, but that could be a different topic. Adstra approaches this from a different perspective. I think our number one advice to a brand or a marketer is to take complete ownership of your data strategy. There are cases where you're interacting with a consumer, like you're selling them something, or they're signing up for your newsletter, where there is a value exchange, they're giving you their information. So you have had a clear exchange of value of like why this person is giving you their information, fine. It's when you're marrying that to other third-party data sets for uses of marketing, things like that, where compliance becomes really difficult. You need to be able to stitch together who that person was with all these other incoming data feeds that you've got, or the media exposure logs that you're tying back. So a persistent view of that customer is the key to maintaining compliance. So outside of, methodology issues of attribution, just general privacy compliance through all these changing laws, you need a persistent way for a consumer to opt out across every touch point where you're tracking data on them. And even though they're not going away, cookies are not persistent. It's just for that browser. So having an identity spine is critical. And if you want to learn more about identity spines and graphs, there is a PDMI Take 20 about this exact topic if you want to deep dive. But for the short of it, basically an identity spine is mapping all of your first and third party data, all of your device signals, all of your licensed data sets, your CRM data, online, offline, everything you've got to a persistent person and household level view. So now the center of gravity for your marketing initiatives are based on an individual, not on just one device or browser or just one signal. And then you're able to sync these opt-out choices that consumers make, or a data request, a deletion request, anything like that. You're able to sync that across all their devices. And associating data is key to this. And that's a really heavy lift. If you're a brand, if you handle a lot of client data, and that's the way that privacy compliance is going, you need to have these associated organized data sets. So Adstra has a graph. We're in a unique position that we collect a lot of this consumer data, and either we assist brands that are building that graph in-house themselves, or we license our graph to them for use, or we even do managed service things like manage their opt-outs or do compliance for categories like gambling or beverage, things like that. The key is this persistent view of the customer. And then we're in a unique position that we own all that data to monitor changes in state level laws for our clients. It just makes it easier for them to do business if they're partnering with an identity partner that's doing the heavy lifting from a compliance standpoint. And then there's cases where if we can't make the data compliant and there's too much risk, like with this My Health, My Data law, for example, we've removed incoming data on consumers from the state of Washington, and we don't use that in our machine learning models or our propensity audience targeting for media campaigns. You need a partner to help track all of that. It's really sophisticated to switch use of data for different purposes, different data sets for different purposes. So from our point of view, the compliance is kind of managing that holistic view of the consumer from an identity perspective that allows you to be compliant, or have somebody manage it for you that their entire business is keeping on top of changes in legislation or terms and conditions of certain vendors like Apple and Google.
Thanks to both of you. It's fascinating to me to see as kind of problems arise in the marketplace, companies come in offering solutions. It's really interesting to see. Justin, in terms of the cookie and pixel litigation, I guess nobody can ever guarantee keeping away the plaintiff's lawyer from your doorstep, but are there some things companies can try to do to mitigate their risk in those areas?
Yeah, there are, Randy, and you're right. I mean, look, like these are creative theories, and you take one compliance step or you make a change somewhere, and the first thing plaintiffs' counsel are going to do is try to find a new theory to come at you some other way. But that said, there are some things that I think businesses should be looking into to mitigate these risks, and they do also happen to align with a lot of the compliance that we'll do for comprehensive privacy laws, for example. So, I mean, one thing is making sure that your cookie management tool that you're using, whether it's on an opt-in or opt-out basis, make sure it's functioning appropriately and blocking the cookies you expect for it to block. These tools are far more fragile than I think businesses sometimes realize. Cookies get added or taken off a website all the time, so trackers change. There's also a question of categorization of individual trackers, oftentimes within the tool. Just because you have this great tool and it is able to talk to your tag manager, for example, and control some of your tags, doesn't necessarily mean it's absolutely going to do the right thing at the right time unless you've told it to. So we always recommend doing some testing, first of all, and then really doing a deep level review on where a certain tracker belongs. Is it a say, a functional a tool that's supported by a service provider, or is it something that is used for targeted advertising, and would you be providing an opt-out on that basis? The others to look at are around cookie banners. I think there are obviously mixed feelings about cookie banners. I think among every population, businesses, consumers, there are pros and cons, but these lawsuits are driving at consent, and one way to create consent is by having an appropriate description and opt-in where you need it, blocking cookies at the right time, that sort of thing. And then, of course, the terms of service are a big issue here. As we mentioned before, these cases are not necessarily, by and large, being brought as consumer class actions. These are firms that are, generally speaking, trying to exploit individual arbitrations. And so I would encourage any business that currently has a set of terms that require individual arbitration to revisit whether that is what they want in every instance, whether it's what they want applied to their website, what modifications they might want to make in terms of consolidation of mass arbitration and taking advantage of some of the new rules that are out there, or perhaps dropping arbitration entirely. There are some well-known names out there that have said, you know what, we'd rather just go fight a class action. We'll tell plaintiffs bring their case in court and we'll deal with it there. So a lot of things to think about, in addition to making sure that, once you love your terms of service, make sure you're getting agreement to those terms. Those are a contract with your users, and the courts are very particular about how a user needs to consent to that agreement. And so that's, again, another potential use for a cookie banner is making sure that you have appropriate opt-in language for the terms themselves, so that once you've got your, gold standard dispute resolution provision, you maximize your chances of actually enforcing that. If I could, Randy, this is a little bit off topic, but I wanted to go back to one thing Emily mentioned on constitutionality and the First Amendment, and it ties in with how timely this webinar is overall. There was earlier this week an oral argument in the Net Choice versus Bonta case. This is the one about the California Age Appropriate Design Code. For those who are following, for those who are not, the AADC has some very similar requirements to most of these state privacy laws, requiring things like DPIAs, so privacy impact assessments, making businesses assess risk to children from their websites before they engage in certain types of practices and so forth. I think that oral argument was absolutely fascinating, and I would encourage anybody who's interested in the constitutionality issues of privacy laws generally to listen to that one. It's maybe 40 minutes long. And there are some serious questions about whether all parts of the AADC will withstand First Amendment scrutiny. And I think it begs the question of, if we in the United States cannot regulate things in this way when we're trying to protect children, would we be able to regulate them when we're just trying to protect consumers generally who are adults? And so we'll be watching really carefully to see what happens with that one. And part of that will be assessing the impact potentially on requirements under all these other privacy laws that we've been seeing more and more of.
Yeah, it's interesting to see what's happening for a lot of years, right? We worried about people under the age of 13 and then everybody else. And now this California law has kind of thrown teenagers in the mix. I don't know if folks saw the FTC last week settled a case involving an anonymous messaging app that was directed mostly to teens, and used their unfairness authority to say it was unfair, a violation of law, to market an anonymous messaging app to teens. So a lot more happening in that sort of teen world than what there used to be. That's also, I guess, go ahead, sorry, Shira.
Yes, about children, there is the COPA regulation, right? So you're not allowed to measure the impact of TV commercial with IP addresses on children programming. And this is in fact creating a huge blind spot in the advertising industry. So it's something, and another thing related to what we talked earlier about IP addresses. I'm just, hearing this conversation, and I just want to mention that this is another big privacy concerns as well.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. Any kind of collecting of personal identifying information for children under the age of 13 requires this, process of parental consent, et cetera. So I can imagine it would be a significant blind spot in terms of collecting that sort of data.
Yes, for a company that do attribution with IP addresses, it is a major blind spot, definitely.
We also have different consent requirements under the state privacy laws depending on age. So like with the CCPA, for example, the right to opt out of sales and sharing, which is going to include cross-context behavioral advertising, that flips over to an opt-in standard if the individual is under 16. And if they're under 13, then it's parental consent. And so you do have there a real difference in what you can do by default versus what you'd have to get consent for. And, it's a real question if you're a mixed audience website that is just generally available to the public, whether you would even find it worth the effort to go to the trouble of creating a whole different web experience because you suspect you may have users who are under 16. I think more often companies are likely to say, well, okay, well, we'll revise our terms and do our best to keep under 16-year-olds off of here, right? Like we would prefer that maybe we just market to adults, for what that's worth.
Yeah. Someday maybe we'll focus on on those of us who are approaching the 65 plus category, or maybe equally vulnerable as
the other end of age appropriate design.
Exactly. I want to ask you all to kind of look in your crystal ball. Tom mentioned the Google announcement yesterday about cookies. Do you all think that the kind of the effort to make cookies go away is forever dead? And what do you all think about the privacy sandbox as kind of an alternative?
I think without broad support for it will not work. You need a broad support for that, for the Google Privacy Sandbox, because it's data. Because all the idea of the Privacy Sandbox is to create a group of users by interest, and it's about about statistics. Don't have enough support for that, not enough websites or advertisers are opting for that. It will not work. On the other end, if there is broad support, it might become something that would be used.
I think Sandbox has a long way to go from a tech perspective before it's a viable solution for this. And it turns out it might not even be that privacy compliant anyway. They just came out last week with their terms and conditions that allows for this. It's come out that there's this backdoor that basically consumer information still could be accessed. There was also this outage back in May. Their API stopped working for like a few hours or something, less than 24 hours, and billions of dollars were lost in commerce for businesses that use Privacy Sandbox. They say in their terms and conditions, their announcement last week, that they're not liable for any harm that happens to businesses that use Sandbox. So there's this effort to be compliant and utilize this tool, but Google's not going to take any of the responsibility for it. It's all kind of falls back to the advertiser. So at the moment, it's not really a reliable solution, and it comes with a lot of risk to those using it. None of the risk on Google. Antitrust perspective from the lawyer.
I wish I could provide it. I am not an antitrust lawyer. But I do think that's a significant concern. I mean, for example, right, like the UK Competition Authority had some real concerns with the sandbox approach. What I would add here is that, and I think Google, when they announced that, they were sort of abandoning this plan, said, well, we're going to have some new kind of loosely specified, unspecified maybe feature in Chrome that's going to give users more control over third-party cookies. I think personally that third-party cookies will be around as long as they are useful. And I do think that if many consumers, start opting out, whether that's in accordance with state law and maybe using things like the global privacy control signal, they'd have to add an extension right now or switch browsers or something to do that. Or if Google rolls this out and it becomes widely used and suddenly, individual users who arrive at a website they're no longer accepting third-party cookies, the market there could change things. But for the time being, it's hard to see them going anywhere because they're effective. And in terms of opt-out rates, for the most part, we don't see a whole lot of consumers opting out, which also begs the question of whether anybody's really asking for this from a privacy standpoint, or whether this is more so about some of the big players in the space asserting control, and of course we come back to antitrust risks and balancing that in that equation.
I read some opinion this morning though about even if Google doesn't completely deprecate cookies, and they never do, they could make some kind of change in the interface of terms and conditions like ATT, and it could be that the consumer, it's like, yes, 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 yes. You just agree. Like, do you want to turn your face into a sketch? Yes, 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 yes. Like on some app on Facebook or something. Like people will opt in. Like we saw, 90-something% opt into AT&T. So ATT. So Google could make a change like that. That would deprecate. Anything could happen. But from a legal perspective, yeah, I think it's sandbox antitrust. I think some things will stay and some will go. I think we're in development right now. I don't think the whole thing is useless, but anything could happen from like a design standpoint on a terms and conditions.
Yeah,
I think that the fact that sorry.
Oh, sure. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. No, I'm thinking that the fact that Google wants to move to opt-in, like similarly what happened with the iOS, with Apple, it's big. Because I don't know if you follow the percentage of the opt-in for Apple, but it's around, based on app developers, it's around 15% to 22% only opt-in. It's completely
Android, it's
crashing.
Opt out. It's like just a design thing, maybe, or who knows why. But on Android, we saw 80-90% on Apple, but 2% opt out on Android.
No, I'm talking about opt-in. Opt-in is different, right? Opt-in is really, I agree to be tracked. And on Apple, it completely collapsed after this change in terms of accuracy. Now, if Google go ahead and do that, even though they're keeping the cookies, but if they're moving to an opt-in methodology, it's going to create a huge difference in terms of tracking. Now, this is what I'm thinking, that if Apple did it at one point, because Apple started with it, right? And Google started to talk about it now. It's probably going to happen, and then it's going to, and consumer will request it across the board, not only on their phone and on their browser, but maybe on their CTV, everywhere. On CTV, there's additional things related to, it's not only the opt-in, the problem. CTV, for example, we did a survey in 2021. Would you want to, we asked one question, a few questions, but one specifically, would you opt out from being tracked if you knew how to do it? Around 80% or 85%, I don't remember the exact number, I can share with whoever wants, but around 80-something% said yes. So there's, for example, in CTV, there's not only the problem that currently it's not easy to opt out, it's hidden. So I believe it's going to become requested by the consumer. So it started with Apple, it will move to Google. It's based on what we read yesterday, and it will continue. This is our thing. Maybe I think it's a bit different than your thought, but this is why we are seeing things on. I can also say that our customers, they don't want pixels.
Yeah, I think
That's
the
a
issue of
huge
tracking the issue of tracking is a fascinating one, and everyone has kind of their view on it. I mean, I wonder, do folks think are consumers, are we all really better off not being tracked, or does tracking actually make things, you know, better for us all?
I think in some ways yes, and in some ways no. I mean, it's a great question, Randy, and I think you know, I'd love to see some like social science research on this, for example. I think there are certainly ways in which consumers benefit from a lot of these technologies. I personally, as a consumer, sort of appreciate in some cases when I am being shown content, including advertisements that relates in some way to something I have done on the internet versus, you know, whatever sort of random things you might run into otherwise. But also, you know, I you know, I may be a particularly privacy aware consumer as a privacy lawyer, but you know, I think we all sort of feel like we want autonomy and we want respect for our private lives, and we don't necessarily want everybody to know everything about us. And so I think at the end of the day, it's got to be a balance. But I'd love to hear what Emily and Shira think on this as well.
I mean, I'm in marketing. Of course, you're better off being served ads that are you. No, but I mean, I think I've also spent time at a pharma data company. Like, it's not a blanket. Should we? Shouldn't we? Of course, there are. You don't want to come home from an oncology appointment and see an ad on your TV that makes you think they know that you are going through treatment right now. You don't want something so specific that it feels icky to the consumer. Or we've all had, like, where you're talking about something with your friends and then you log on to Meta later and you see an ad for that exact same thing on Instagram. There's consumer perception relationship with the brand that you don't want to be too targeted. But then there's other instances, like if I'm shopping for something and I'm not totally sold on it, next time I enter, you know, that platform or in my email, I get a 20% off coupon. Great, that's great for me. They tracked my behavior. It worked out for me as a consumer. I got better value from that product because they knew who I was. I think, of course, there's instances where marketing helps, or if I'm looking at a product, I can see competitive offers, you know, targeted to me if I'm in market. I think it's not a blanket, should we, shouldn't we? And of course, there are instances where it benefits the consumer. I mean, go marketing. That's my job. But Shira, I'm curious your perspective,
So,
professionally
yes,
and
my
as a consumer.
I have several thoughts. So first, I think we need to differ between marketing and tracking, because a good marketing piece is a good marketing piece. It's like the let's do it of Nike. It's something that we remember till today, right? Now, in terms of tracking, I started Resort because I in fact felt that there must be another way to measure the impact of advertisement without infringing privacy. There is, in terms of tracking, we need to let the people decide. This is what I think. So the question is it good or is not good? I don't think it's depend of us. I think it depends of the user. If they don't want to be tracked, it's their decision. It's the amount of how much they want to be exposed should be left to them. We cannot make the decision, you know, this is in terms of pharma, you shouldn't, this is in terms of clothes, you should. I don't think it's our decision. I think it should be in the hand of the consumer, of the user. And that's why I liked, in fact, the idea of the opt-in, because it's bring the decision to them. Opt-out, it leaves the decision not with the user. Why? Because it's complicated to opt out. Not, as you know, it's not always upfront. It's mainly a lot of uninformed consent. And an opt-in approach is taking away this uninformed consent. It's becoming an informed consent. And I feel much more comfortable with that. I believe that in ethical practice, and I think this is this is making more sense to me.
I think in the US, we're really behind on the value exchange of data for value. There's, in Europe, a lot of like the cable companies will say, let me track what you watch with ACR data and you get $20 off your bill every month. I think we're severely lacking on a lot of things like that in the US. It's, tracking by default, like Shira said, and then there's no, I don't know, I think we're bad at the value exchange to consumers because we understand like Instagram is free to me because I see ads. But then there's a lot of other places where I'm giving my data where I'm receiving no value in exchange, where I think you would get clearer opt-in as a brand or as a tech platform if there was a better value exchange. Generally, tech is bad at that. Or goods.
That's really interesting to me, Emily, because it reminds me of the California financial incentive rules that are within the CCPA. And that's one of the only places where we have opt-in consent requirements and the business is required to explain within a notice to the consumer what value they're getting and how the business will value the consumer's data that's provided in exchange and get them to consent. So it's interesting that, on the flip side, right, like I'm hearing from somebody who's a marketer saying, well, okay, like that's actually good, right? Like that potentially, tells consumers the value they're getting and they will likely want to provide data for advertising when, the drafters of the CCPA at least seem to think that this would be a barrier to businesses collecting data when somebody signs up for a coupon or a rewards program or what have you.
In tech, it definitely would be, and I think the design of it is so, like my Samsung TV, when I set it up, I did opt into ACR data, but I didn't know. You don't read that. You don't read when you're opening your TV for the first time. You don't read the screen and say, like, so sure, you could even like by law require that, people opt in, but do they really know what they're doing? I think brands have a really good opportunity to have a really rich like CRM database or first party database because they're at the exact point of data collection with the consumer where they can offer really good value. It's harder on the tech side. A DSP like isn't, the trade desk isn't going to go in and tell every single person. It gets harder the further away from the customer that you get. But yeah, I mean, it's a flawed system.
So speaking of tracking, I think Tom has been tracking whether we've had questions come in, and if folks do have questions, please do put them in the chat. And I hate to interrupt. It's been a great kind of free-flowing conversation that I hate to interrupt, but let me just turn it over to Tom for a second to see if we've got some questions that have come in for folks.
Yeah, great job, you guys. Really interesting conversation, and we do have a couple of questions from the audience out there. First one being, and this is for everybody, so whoever wants to take a crack first, what is of most concern to each of you at this point when it comes to data privacy regulations? States, feds, class action? What is it?
Most concern. That's a hard-hitting question. I'm glad to just jump in really quick on this, and I would say it probably is the class action risk right now in my world. I mean, I think we do have an ever increasing number of state privacy laws, and there will be more. By the end of the year, next year, we're going to be at a place where roughly 50% of consumers are covered under their state law. And that's a lot to deal with, and it's sweeping in lots and lots of businesses to have to deal with these things. But they are mostly following a similar model at this point, and we're starting to really develop a good playbook of how you deal with them. And how you comply and how you can continue to meet your goals, including for advertising and marketing, while complying with these laws. The class actions are frankly a little harder to keep tabs on. Plaintiffs' counsel are not particularly interested in setting one set of rules and then playing by those rules. It's a whole different type of it's a whole different set of incentives that exist in that world, and they're going to continue to come at businesses as long as they think they can find a profitable way to do it. And I do think we have good strategies for dealing with known claims, but we don't know what we don't know, and they're very creative.
I think state law is our fragmented legal landscape is a huge burden on small businesses, on brands, on tech companies. Also, what keeps coming up in my world that I think we'll be talking about, this time in 2 years, maybe a year, 2 years, is use of data in machine learning and AI. When does it stop being your data? Who owns what data? Once you've learned off of it, that's a hot topic for us right now at Adstra.
Great. Kind of going down this same track, someone wanted to know about the Supreme Court ruling ending the Chevron deference and how do you foresee regulators pressing ahead? More importantly, how should marketers view the change to what teeth regulations might actually carry in the future? Anyone?
Justin, are you familiar with that, or Randy?
Nobody wants Chevron deference. I guess that's me. I don't necessarily want Chevron deference. Okay, so I will say a brief summary of what I know. I'm not a federal administrative law expert by any stretch, but my understanding is that, I think we're all expecting more successful challenges to federal regulations as a result of LOPR. I think that's out there, right? What will fall and how, I think that really remains to be seen. But this is a slow process. This Chevron had been around for, a couple decades, at least. I think it was mid 80s. Certainly this precedent is going to likely be around for a while, and it remains to be seen what's going to happen. This does tie back in, though, to this question of are we, regulating privacy at the state level or the federal level, and it, what's the related impact? So long as we have the regime that we have right now with a whole bunch of state laws, the likely impact in terms of, things like tracking technologies used broadly to market to consumers is really a function of state law and therefore a bit more immune. If we were talking about federal laws, so I know Shira mentioned COPPA, maybe you start to get more directly into an analysis of, agency authority. Not pronouncing any opinions on COPPA, of course, or whether it would withstand review at this point. It's obviously got multiple components and so forth, but the impact is going to be much more direct at the federal level, and we just have less privacy regulation at the federal level. It's mostly a question of state law.
Yeah, I think the one impact potentially, in the absence of a federal privacy law, and who knows if we'll ever get one, but in the absence of one, the FTC has been kind of very expansively using its unfairness authority or deception authority to regulate privacy. And I could foresee potentially more challenges there to whether, the FTC's interpretation of its kind of general unfairness authority is big enough to encompass things like, banning practices altogether in certain privacy spaces.
Great. Well, wedge one more in here, and I think it's this may be directed more towards Shira and Emily. Brands strive to be compliant, but they also like to push the boundaries when they want to optimize their attribution or collection of consumer data, future marketing efforts. Do you have a rule of thumb that you can share to help brands safely optimize within the legal limits?
I can start.
Oh, well, we'll have to go, Shira. We'll have two different opinions.
Go ahead, Shira.
Please go.
No, you got it, Shira. Thanks.
So with us, it's there's no much privacy issue, in fact, because we don't use pixels. So in terms of optimization, we do everything with statistics and algorithm that we've developed, and we leverage data that there's no PII into it. So I'm not sure if this is answering the question, but we don't have any.
That's great.
I can tell you that it's very straightforward.
Right?
Sorry?
You're working in media attribution, right?
Correct.
So I think if a brand, if you have a contact with consumer, like you are getting their address because you're mailing them something, there are other marketing use cases or just business use cases where you are interacting with customer data. Either hire an amazing team to manage that in-house or work with a company like an identity management company or a CDP or someone that it's their entire business to manage your data and make sure that you're compliant. It takes a dedicated, it's like build versus buy. It takes a dedicated, team of people to connect data, make sure it's compliant, make sure you're opting out, keep track of each of the state laws. So yeah, if you're a small business and you want to operate nationally, that's a lot to take on. You do have to think about that, the data that you store, but there are a variety of consumer data platforms and identity companies that can help you manage that.
Also, if I can just add, call your lawyer. I think oftentimes brands are surprised, once we really get into the weeds on, is this compliant or can we do it in a compliant way? We often find a path. So I do think in this space, even if you are pushing the envelope, sometimes legal counsel is your friend and will help you to do it in a way that, frankly, might surprise you that it actually does end up working and it does comply.
Yeah, and some of it is just up to your appetite for risk, right? Like you said, Justin, a lot of this stuff hasn't even been litigated. Like CCPA, we don't even know what personal data, like that hasn't actually gone anywhere yet. So it's up to right now when we're in this weird legal land, it is a little bit appetite of risk for the company. On the sell side, I work with some companies that have a really strict interpretation of the word personal data, and then some that are fine with doing different things with personal data. So at this moment, there's not really like a right or wrong way to handle it. A lot of it is up to your appetite of risk and, do you use it in a compliant way or do you cut that data? Do you cut California consumers out of your database entirely? Or do you do things that, there's still a little bit up for interpretation in how you handle that.
Great, everybody. Thank you all so much for your time. I want to say thanks to Randy. First of all, he had to jump for, I believe, an FTC conference call. I want to say thanks to Randy and his role in the Workshop Council and bringing this group together, moderating, kind of shepherding along. So thanks, Randy, and thank you, Shira, Emily, Justin, all for being here. We appreciate it. If you're a PDMI member and would like to get involved in a PDMI webinar, you can reach out to me today. Share your interest in any of our 7 member councils. They all have a hand in building these educational opportunities for you. So your next chance to attend a PDMI live event online tomorrow is tomorrow, July 24th at 2 o'clock Eastern, 11 o'clock Pacific, when the Brand Response Council airs its latest episode of Take 20. Look at how performance marketers are reaching the still massive and wealthy boomer market. To register, please visit thepdmi.com/take-20. And finally, online registration is moving along for PDMI West, October 7th through 9th at Hard Rock Hotel San Diego. Badges are just $395 for PDMI members and $595 for non-members. And our specially priced hotel room block for the show is available now for badge holders only. Visit thepdmi.com/PDMI-West to get your badge and your discounted hotel room. Thanks again to you for joining us. Thanks all of you for speaking today. We appreciate it. Be well. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.